I was 13 when my own mother smiled, waved goodbye, and left me alone at one of the busiest train stations in the state.
My dad laughed.
My older brother pulled out $20 and bet I'd be crying within an hour. They called it a harmless family joke. They expected me to panic, then come running back, so everyone could laugh together. But I never went back. 20 years passed without a single visit. Then, at 7:14 this morning, my phone lit up with 29 missed calls from the same two people who once bet I couldn't survive one afternoon without them. They finally needed me. If you'd asked my family, they would have told you I was too sensitive. That was their favorite excuse. Every embarrassing prank, every cruel nickname, every moment they laughed while I stood there pretending it didn't hurt, it was always followed by the same sentence. Come on, lighten up. It's just a joke. I heard those words so often that I almost believed them. My mom loved being the center of attention. If relatives came over for dinner, she'd tell stories about my awkward moments. If neighbors stopped by, she'd point out every mistake I'd ever made. My dad rarely started the jokes, but he never stopped them either. He'd laugh, shake his head, and tell me I needed thicker skin. My older brother, Tyler, treated it like a competition. The louder everyone laughed, the prouder he looked. I was 13 years old when they decided to pull what they later called their funniest prank ever. It happened during a Saturday trip into the city. Mom said we were spending the afternoon together before grabbing dinner on the way home. I actually looked forward to it. Moments when the four of us spent time together without arguing were rare. By late afternoon, we stopped at one of the busiest train stations I'd ever seen. People hurried in every direction. Suitcases rolled across the floor. Announcements echoed from overhead speakers. I stayed close behind my parents, afraid I'd lose sight of them in the crowd. Mom smiled at me. Stay right here, she said, pointing to a bench. We're just running over to buy snacks. Don't move. I nodded. It didn't seem strange. They walked away laughing about something Tyler had whispered. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Then 40. I checked every entrance I could see. Nothing. I borrowed a station clock to convince myself I hadn't imagined the time. An hour. Still no family. My stomach tightened. That's when I noticed something across the parking lot. Our SUV. It rolled slowly toward the exit. Through the passenger window, Tyler leaned out, laughing so hard he could barely sit upright. Dad was grinning behind the wheel. My mom looked directly at me, lifted one hand in a playful wave, and then the car disappeared into traffic. For several seconds, I couldn't even breathe. They hadn't forgotten me. They had left me on purpose. Around me, thousands of strangers continued rushing through their day as though nothing had happened. I sat on that bench trying to convince myself they'd come back. They never did. Nearly 2 hours later, a station employee noticed I was still there and gently asked if I was all right. I looked at the phone he offered me. I knew I could call home. Instead, I dialed the one person who had always treated me like I mattered. That single phone call quietly ended one life and began another. The person I called that afternoon was my Aunt Diane. She wasn't my mother's sister. She was my dad's older cousin, the one relative everyone dismissed as too soft because she treated people with kindness instead of criticism. When she answered, I didn't even make it through my first sentence before I started crying. I don't know what to do. She didn't ask unnecessary questions. She simply said, tell me exactly where you are. I'll be there. 45 minutes later, I saw her walking through the station, searching every bench until our eyes met. She wrapped me in the tightest hug I'd ever received. For the first time that day, I felt safe. My parents eventually called her, not because they were worried, because they wanted to know if she'd ruined the joke by picking me up too soon. I still remember the look on Aunt Diane's face after hanging up. She didn't repeat everything they said. She only whispered, no child deserves to hear those words. That evening, she drove me to her house instead of taking me back. She told me I could stay for as long as I needed. Days turned into weeks. Weeks became months. With help from counselors and family services, temporary arrangements slowly became permanent. My parents never fought very hard to change that. They insisted everyone had misunderstood a harmless prank that had gotten blown completely out of proportion. Not once did they apologize to me. Not once did they ask how terrified I'd felt sitting alone in that station. Life with Aunt Diane was quiet. Nobody laughed when I made mistakes. Nobody hid my belongings or embarrassed me in front of guests. For the first time, home felt peaceful. She encouraged me to focus on school, to believe that my future didn't have to resemble my past. Little by little, I did. I graduated with honors, earned a scholarship, and eventually built a career designing transportation systems. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same kind of stations that once represented fear eventually became part of the work I loved. Every birthday, my parents sent short messages. Hope you're doing okay. Happy birthday. Maybe we should talk someday. There was never an apology, only small attempts to pretend nothing had happened. I never replied. 20 years passed. Then one ordinary Tuesday morning, while pouring my first cup of coffee, my phone vibrated across the kitchen counter. When I picked it up, I froze. 29 missed calls. Every one of them from my mother and my father. A new voicemail appeared seconds later. My mother's voice was shaking. Please call us back. We need to talk. This time, it's really important. For the first time in 20 years, they sounded afraid. I didn't call them back. Not immediately. For 2 days, I let the phone stay silent while I tried to decide whether 20 years of peace was worth risking for one conversation. Finally, curiosity won. I agreed to meet them at a quiet cafe halfway across town. A public place. Neutral ground. When I walked in, I almost didn't recognize them. My father looked smaller somehow. His hair had turned completely gray. My mother's confident smile had disappeared, replaced by tired eyes that never seemed to settle. For a long moment, none of us spoke. Then my mother whispered, "Thank you for coming." I nodded but stayed standing. "You said it was important." She looked at my father before taking a slow breath. "We're sorry." It was the first genuine apology I'd ever heard from either of them. Not, "We're sorry you were upset." Not, "It was just a joke." Simply, "We're sorry." Dad rubbed his hands together. "That day at the station," he said quietly, "we thought we'd drive around the block, scare you for a few minutes, then come back laughing. But after you were gone, everything started falling apart." My brother moved across the country years earlier. Family gatherings became smaller. Friends stopped visiting. The house they once filled with laughter had become painfully quiet. Mom lowered her eyes. "We kept telling ourselves you'd eventually come home." Then 1 year became 5, 5 became 20. I listened without interrupting. Finally, I asked the question that had stayed with me since I was 13. "Why now?" My father reached into his jacket and placed a folded envelope on the table. Inside was a handwritten letter. They weren't asking for money. They weren't asking for a place to live. They simply wanted one chance to admit they had confused cruelty with humor and spent 20 years regretting it. I folded the letter and slid it back across the table. "I believe you're sorry." Both of them looked up. "But forgiveness isn't the same as getting your old life back." Tears rolled down my mother's face. "I built a home with people who made me feel safe," I said calmly. "I spent years learning that love isn't supposed to make you afraid. I'm grateful for that life, and I'm not leaving it behind." I wished them peace. Then I stood, walked toward the door, and stepped into the morning sunlight. Some people think the strongest ending is revenge. It isn't. Sometimes the strongest ending is quietly choosing the life you built after someone else tried to convince you that you didn't deserve one. And that was the journey that finally led me home.